I guess it helps if you turn the microphone on. All right, can everybody come on in and grab a seat? And we are going to get started talking about the next generation and what it looks like to disciple and mentor and really capture the heart of Generation Z. So before I start, I wanted to just share a little bit about myself. I have grown up as a missionary kid. My parents were in Indonesia, and my wife and I actually spent a couple years on the mission field in Indonesia. We thought we were going to be there forever, and it kind of imploded, and we were left kind of wondering, God, what are you doing? And I always joke, complete joke, that after Indonesia, I tell people that we got banished to student ministry. So I ended up spending the next 10 years doing church student ministry and recently transitioned out. But during that whole transition, I was really wrestling with God because my heart was for unreached people groups and missions, and just really did a lot of wrestling and a lot of just conversations with God saying, God, like my heart is for the nations, but here I am in Silicon Valley doing student ministry with kids that honestly, it doesn't seem like they care. And I think during that process of just really wrestling, I ended up coming to terms with I'm going to use my student ministry and I'm going to build the student ministry as a sending student ministry. So my whole mission focused became about let's come alongside students, let's give them a vision, let's find new ways to engage them and really capture their hearts. So really the last 10 years of my life have been trying to unlock the puzzle of capturing the hearts and minds of the next generation. And what is the gospel for the next generation? I currently serve as the Southwest Mobilizer with Africa Inland Mission, and it has been an amazing transition. But today, we are going to be talking about innovations in engaging the next generation for discipleship and mission. And really, the heart of this research is taking a survey of what is working around the country, what are they engaging with, and then using that as kind of a guide to figure out what are they hungry for. And then take the gospel and overlay it with where Gen Z is at and what is the gospel for the next generation. So here's the plan for the next kind of half hour. Number one, we're going to talk about the opportunity through a historical lens that we face right now. Number two, we're going to meet Gen Z. What are 6 key characteristics of the next generation? Number three, we're going to look at innovations outside the church. We're going to look at innovations within the church, and then we're going to kind of use those and unpack the themes and the key findings that we see through all of that. And Tyler said earlier, like, the answer is not looking at business, and I agree completely. But I do think we can take a look at current business strategies, current marketing strategies, and that can be a guide to what they're really hungry for, what they're longing for. So would you pray with me for a moment? Heavenly Father, thank you for today. I just pray that today that you are glorified. I pray that you ignite new visions in the people of this room, new passion for the next generation, God. I pray that we move from just this hopeless feeling that the next generation is falling away from you and just know that you are at work and that you are moving. Lord, we lift our time up to you. In Jesus' name, amen. It's a hot, sunny, early afternoon. And he's sitting off to the side, and as he looks out, he sees the faces of the people that he's about to speak. He sees stress on their face. He sees fear on their face. And he knows that as he gets up to the microphone, he has to cast a vision for the impossible. He has to inspire new confidence in the people, in the American people. And he's thinking about everything that is going on. The war with Russia, the Cold War is at its height. Everybody's building bunkers. The threat of war is in the minds and thoughts of everybody that he's speaking to. There's racial tensions going on. And as he gets up to that microphone, he comes up and he casts this vision. Some people say it's one of the best speeches ever given from a president. And he casts this vision that we are going to go to the moon. This is what he says. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. That's my best Boston accent, so give me some grace. So he's stepping up before this people, and he has to cast this vision to the seemingly impossible, something that is so far out of reach. He calls the American people to dream. And during that speech, there's so much being unpacked. And if you go on YouTube and you watch the speech, you can see the faces of the people that he's speaking to, because the way they did it, there were people behind and there were people all around. But you can see the faces of the people change as he speaks. And within 1 year of that speech, the Cuban Missile Crisis is at its peak 1 month later after that speech. So it's not like things changed immediately. It's not like things got miraculously easier. 1 year after that speech, Martin Luther King would get up and give this speech, the I Have a Dream speech. And again, it's these amazing leaders casting vision for the impossible, calling the American people to dream about something that seems so impossible, so far out of reach. And honestly, when I think about our current context, about the American church, about the next generation, I think that we're in a similar season. I think that we're in a season where people need to learn to dream. This is a line. It says, seasons of dramatic political and social change lead to seasons of increased innovation. It's a reality. And then increased innovation leads to new opportunities for gospel engagement. These are two truths. We see this phenomenon happen in the late 40s and the early 50s after World War II with the rise of the parachurch movement. There's so many ministries that started during that season. And it's because they're coming out of a season of World War II where everything is in disarray. Everybody is afraid. Everybody has hunkered down because they're afraid of the possibilities of what is going to happen. They're afraid of the future. But in that season, immediately following World War II, so many ministries found their birth. Ministries like Young Life, Cru, Youth for Christ, YWAM, just to name a few. The list goes on and on and on. And it's because of these realities. Seasons of dramatic political and social change lead to seasons of increased innovation. Increased innovation leads to new opportunities for gospel engagement. So as the church, what does it look like for us to begin to dream again? What does it look like for us to begin to find new wineskins to carry the gospel? And honestly, I think Boy with a Ball is one of those expressions where it thinks outside of the lines of the way we have thought for the last 50 years. Now, let's move on to Generation Z. Let's meet Generation Z. And Generation Z is those, it's defined as those born between 1997 and 2012. So that puts them at ages 11 to about 27. And on either end of generational studies, the stats blur, like the generations blur, okay? So that means that in the last kind of 2 years and currently, Generation Z, the top end of Generation Z, is hitting the workforce. Which also means that businesses across the country are scrambling to figure out how to engage the next generation. What does it look like for us to come alongside? What changes do we need to make in business? What changes do we need to make so that we get the most out of them? That's the business mindset. How do we unlock the potential of this emerging generation? It also means that the bottom end of Generation Z, They are hitting 7th grade, which means the generation coming, Generation Alpha, is currently hitting 6th and 7th grade. So I have begun to see new statistics, new studies that are being done on Gen Alpha, but honestly, I think it's too soon. I think it's too soon to start studying Generation Alpha in a meaningful way because they're still on the front edge. They're not making their own decisions. They're still in their parents' household. But those studies are going to begin to start pouring out. And it's going to be interesting to see the differences between the two generations. But again, they also blur together. So, Generation Z. They are the Delta generation. In 2018, New York Times put out an article. And in this article is really interesting. In this article, they decided to go to some of their younger readers, some Generation Z readers. And they actually asked them, what would you like to be called? Because everybody has a different name for Generation Z. Believe it or not, they did not like the term Generation Z. One term that came out of that article, that study, was the Delta generation. And it was one of their readers that kind of unpacked it. What she said was, Delta is used to denote change and uncertainty in mathematics and sciences. And my generation was shaped by change and uncertainty. Now, this is crazy because this was 2018. I don't know if she was prophetic or what, but she was like seeing into the future because things only got crazier from there. Since then, the threat of war is even higher. Since then, we've gone through a pandemic. Since then, elections have only gotten crazier. So the reality is that Generation Z, whether we agree or not, they are the Delta generation. They have been through so much change in their upbringing. And if you think about it, like the divorce rates are through the roof. So we're not even talking just like overall political landscape. We're not talking about business landscape alone. We're talking about the landscape in their households. Stability is not a term that it can be used to define Generation Z. They have been through so much change. And honestly, like as we talk about the missional potential of the next generation, I think that they have an advantage because they are so adaptable. They have so much that they can offer the missions world. Next, they're the dreamer generation. Generation Z is so passionate about making a difference. You do not have to convince them that the world is broken. You do not have to convince them that things are not the way they should be. They will not, as a generation, as a people, they will not tolerate injustice. And I think we see this, right? If you look at the news currently, the divide between what's going on in Jerusalem and Palestine, like you see the next generation rising up because they are so hungry for something to fight for. They want to see the world change, and they're not going to tolerate injustice. They are driven by activism. They are hungry to make an impact. Next, Generation Z has a heightened desire to be mentored. I'm a millennial, and I think as we came through, we kind of had this idea that we wanted to do it on our own, that we wanted to figure out the way. We didn't want to do it the way people had done it. We didn't want to be told how to do it. But there's been a shift in Generation Z where they are so hungry to be mentored. They are hungry to be discipled. In a study by Cigna Health recently, it said 83% said that they would like to be mentored. 83% of Gen Z said they would like to be mentored. This is a study that was done of about 1,000 Gen Z workers. Now, if you take that reality and you overlay it with a study that came out by Barna just a couple years ago, the Barna study said that 79% of pastors said that they are not fulfilling the responsibilities to train up the next generation. And it's not because they don't have a desire to. It's not because they don't see the need. They're busy. They're busy planning for the sermon the next week. There's so much that is going into it. But the bottom line is, pastors believe that the church is not rising up to the responsibility to train up the next generation. In that same Barna study, 73% of pastors say that they are concerned about the quality of the future of young leaders. So there's this gap. Gen Z is hungry for mentorship. They're hungry for discipleship. They're looking at the world and they're saying, where do I get it? Who will disciple me? Who's going to pour into me? Who's going to help me believe when I don't believe? Who's going to help me figure out how to move forward? And then there's the churches, and they're not meeting that need. Gen Z is the digital natives. They're the first generation to be beyond the memory before there was an iPhone. How many Gen Zers are in the room? We got a couple. Okay. Do you remember the time before the iPhone? Yes? Okay. Gen Z is hooked on their phones. Okay? A recent study, Gallup, says that Gen Z is spending 4.8 hours per day on social media alone. That's a lot. That doesn't count screen time. That doesn't count anything else. It's 4.8 hours. So if you do the math, that's 33.6 hours per week, 134 hours per month, and 1,612 hours per year on social media alone. That means that in less than 5.5 years, they would have spent an entire year on social media alone. And here's the reality. Yes, Gen Z is hooked on their phones. They're not the only ones. We're all hooked on our phones. I don't know if I'm spending 4.8 hours a day, but I'm spending way more than I should on social media. Okay? The same study says that they're spending more than 8 hours per day on screens. So 4.8 hours a day on social media. That's the YouTube, the Instagram, the social media, and then 8 hours a day when you include TV, computer screens for school, all of that. Gen Z is the lonely generation. Loneliness has gone through the roof. 73% report to sometimes or always feeling alone. 43% have been diagnosed with a mental health condition. These numbers are going through the roof, especially with the next generation. And it's all connected. Dan White Jr. wrote, "We are losing the ability to connect in meaningful ways." He says that there's plenty of places to connect. There's plenty of places to build relationships. There's plenty of places to do it. But the reality is that when we are in those spaces, we're losing the ability to go deep. We're losing the ability to feel like we are connected in relationship and community. And we see that in our churches. We see that in our youth groups. We see that everywhere. So here's what I want to do. We are going to move in. We're going to shift a little bit. So those are 6 characteristics defining Gen Z. Now, one more. They are the corrective generation. Now, this was an article that came out by Kevin Brown. He's the president at Asbury University. And after the revival happened, the outpouring that happened a little more than a year ago, he had been processing it. He'd been trying to explain what he was seeing in the next generation. And he was trying to explain really the heart of the outpouring that happened. This is what he says. Gen Z is emerging as a corrective generation to the casual Christianity that has marked our religious landscape and characterized our de-churching movement. There is hunger for something more. So I think that the temptation is to look at the next generation and just feel hopelessness. Because there's feeling, it feels like they're leaving the church. There's no hope of engagement. I see it differently. I see so much hope when it comes to engaging the next generation. And I have been walking closely for the last decade, for more than the last decade, with the next generation, processing and trying to figure out the culture, trying to figure out where their heart is, trying to figure out what is the gospel for the next generation. And it's summed up in this statement from Kevin Brown where he says they're fighting against the casual Christianity. So the Christianity that they have seen modeled, the things that they have seen in their churches, they're pushing against that. They're saying, no, there's got to be more. If you want my heart, if you want me to be involved, I need more. I need more than just a Sunday service. I need to see people on fire. I need to see people that are hungry to take the Bible, to take Jesus, and change the world. To transform the world. To take it to places, to people that are hurting. That's what they're asking for. And we've begun to see something shifting. Because with the outpouring, and then there's more outpourings like that are popping up around the world. Where the next generation is coming in and they're saying, I want Jesus, and I'm going to sit here for hours and I'm going to worship and I'm going to be radical about following this guy named Jesus. So we're going to transition now into innovations outside the church designed for the emerging generation. And I struggled a little bit with this title because some of these innovations, some of these changes are not designed for the next generation. That's a simple reality. Like they didn't get into a room together and sit at a table and say, we're going to figure out how to engage the next generation. While they are doing that, some of these innovations have happened accidentally. Like they do it and Generation Z responds and they're like, this is awesome. This leads us towards something. And remember, that's the heart of this study, right? Like we're going to look at these as breadcrumbs, trying to figure out where is Gen Z? What's their heart? What are they longing for? Okay, so number one, I don't know if you've heard about it. It's been in the news a lot recently, but there is a recruiting crisis in the U.S. military. So each branch of the military has responded differently to the recruiting crisis. And the reality is, this recruiting crisis that the U.S. military is experiencing is not that different from the recruiting crisis that churches are experiencing when it comes to finding youth pastors. So many churches are going, like in transition of a youth pastor, they're going for a year or more while they try and find a new youth pastor because they're just not coming up through the ranks for whatever reason. It's the same in the missions world. Missions organizations across the country are trying to unlock Generation Z because they're not signing up to go long-term missions like they did in the past. So, the U.S. Navy had one response. Their response was to change the recruiting requirements, the standards of what it took to sign up for the Navy. So what they did, they are now saying that you no longer have to be a high school graduate in order to enlist in the Navy. You can test in. Now, thank goodness we're not going to be talking about the Air Force because Jerry might get after me if he was here. But yeah, they would say that they're not lowering the standards, they're just changing the requirements. I don't know if that's true. I read it how I see it, okay? The U.S. Army has had a completely different approach. So the first thing that they did, and this is really interesting, the first thing they did is they went back to the be all you can be slogan, which was a slogan I remember when I was growing up. In the late 80s, early 90s, it was all the commercials were be all you can be, and they were inspiring, and they were like, yes. So the U.S. Army actually spent $117 million in this rebranding campaign to go back to something that they've already used. It's not this new grand idea, it's something that they've already used. So they've been like, hey, that actually resonated with Gen Z. There's something there. And as a taxpayer, I don't know. Like they're spending $117 million to go back into the past. But it points us to something. The other thing that they are doing is they are rapidly investing and developing early engagement programs. So what these early engagement programs look like are they'll have a recruiter actually sign up, and they've got these programs that engage younger high school students, and it actually plugs them into a mentorship, discipleship program where those Army soldiers will come alongside high school students and help them train, help them learn, help them develop into potential recruits that will be more prepared than they were in the past. So they're doing something that the church should be doing, right? Like they are engaging, they're saying, okay, we're not getting the type of recruits that we need at a certain level. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down lower, we're going to meet them where they're at, and we're going to walk with them towards the future. They're casting a big vision. Now, Patagonia, they recently did a pretty big and significant shift. They put the entire company into a trust, which means all the profits that they are making end up going into a cause. And this is what it says. It says instead, I can't read it. Instead of going public, you could say we're going purpose. Instead of expecting our value, instead of extracting our value, I can't read it. My eyes are blurry. You can read it. I apologize. The point is that they are going purpose. They're saying we're going to go purpose. We're not going to extract our value from nature. We're going to extract our value, and we're going to use the money that Patagonia makes to change the world. And this is one of those. It was not intentional. It was not like we're going to develop this strategy to get Gen Z, but Gen Z responded. And the heart of it is this reality. Gen Z is hungry to make a difference. They are looking and longing for something to fight for. They want to change the world. And Patagonia, they're like, okay, like this is awesome. We're engaging Gen Z, even though we didn't mean to engage Gen Z. But Gen Z resonated with the reality and the change. Nike, this is another one. Like they spend so much money engaging the next generation. They've done it so many ways. But there was this one commercial that resonated differently than others. And I actually just want you to watch it. That commercial stands in such stark contrast to this one. This is another ad. So often in Nike, it's this like superhuman feat. It's this superhuman athlete. But the last one, she's processing the same feelings that we all experience when we go for a run. Like at least the feelings and the thoughts that I experience when I go for a run. I don't want to do this. My bed is so warm and comfortable. I don't have the right body type for this. I'm not made for this. I can't do this. And they saw that with that ad, the new ad, Gen Z responded. And it's getting at something. It's authentic. It's transparent. It's vulnerable. Remember, Gen Z is pushing against that which isn't real, that seems fake. And honestly, like this idea of just being completely transparent and authentic and sharing our darkest moments. It reminds me of Paul. Paul says that he's the sinner of all sinners. He says that he struggled, like he shares his vulnerabilities. When I have walked with Gen Z, when I share my darkest moments, when I share my questions, when I share my struggles, the moments where I have questioned God, walls come down. And they immediately connect to it. It points us to something. It's a breadcrumb. General Electric, Cisco, and Target have invested in reverse mentorship. They are enlisting young leaders, Gen Z leaders, and they're saying, you have something to offer. So what they're doing is they're taking young leaders and they're giving them a platform and an opportunity to teach the older, more seasoned employees things that they don't know. So what they're doing is they're intentionally calling up the next generation of workers saying, hey, can you teach us in social media? Can you teach us in electronics? Can you teach us what you have? Can you teach us about your generation? And what this does is it gives the next generation a platform to lead. And in that process, the company CEOs are able to pick the risers. They're able to pick the best. And it also gives Gen Z more buy-in. They're like, I'm part of this. I'm valued. I'm needed here. And they're having huge success. Another innovation, Allstate, Capital One, and the Dover Corporation are investing in rotational development. And what this looks like is they will give young leaders, young employees, opportunities and experiences in multiple different roles on the team. And it gives them, it's a mentorship program, essentially. It helps Gen Z identify where they belong best. It helps them identify their giftings and their strengths. It also helps the older employees to be able to help them identify and come alongside and help them dream about the future. It also is basically a pathway towards development and towards the future. So these companies are having huge success with some pretty simple development tactics. Now we're going to shift and we're going to go to innovations within the church. And this is a relatively small sample size, but there's two examples. And both of these examples within the church are having huge success, unprecedented success with the next generation especially. Number one is Ocean Water in San Clemente, California. Ocean Water is a church, it's a small church, and what they did is they actually developed and have built the church around a cause. So they claimed the cause, like there's places in the world that don't have clean drinking water. So what they did, they've developed this water purifying system, and they're actually building churches around those water purifying systems. And this church started in 2019. They have grown in the last 5 years to 46 churches. These are small churches, 46 churches in 7 countries of 1,300 people. So clearly, they're onto something. That growth is so unusual in the American church, and they're not just in America, they're not just in the U.S., but they're having huge success. And I think they're having huge success. One reason they're having huge success is they're tapping into this desire from Gen Z, from the next generation, to make a tangible difference. I wanted to share this with you. This is their scorecard. So as it goes through, just look at some of the stats. Can you guys see that? Can you read it? It should just play. So number one on the list, days surfed every day. Waves ridden all over the world. They have 3 water projects in Indonesia, El Salvador, and then also California. They have produced 72,000 liters of water, clean drinking water. And like I said, they've got 46 churches, each comprised of 10 to 15 people, and it has grown to 1,300 people. So what they are doing is they are investing in the next generation. They're keeping it small. That has been a theme today. Let's keep it small. There's an invitation to a cause, an invitation to make a difference, an invitation into something so big. And the whole thought is you have something to offer. You have a role to play. Number 2, they connect in meaningful relationship. Remember, we were talking about the loneliness of the next generation. Because they keep it small, they're able to dive deep in relationships. So they're able to be known. They're able to share their weaknesses. They're able to share their dreams. They're leaning into discipleship. So they're developing leaders who develop leaders who are willing to go deep, willing to dive into relationship, willing to commit to one another. And then they're having fun in the process because they're surfing all over the world. So it points us to something for the next generation. Here's another church. This is the Brook in Denver, Colorado. Now, I had never heard of it. I live in Denver, and I had never heard of it. But they're growing so fast. And they have identified their cause. According to some study, this is on their website, Denver is the 3rd loneliest city in America. So what they have decided to do is they're chasing after young professionals because it also says that 50% of the people that live in Denver are between the ages of 20 and 40. So what they're doing, they're saying, okay, there's a need there, and we can meet that need with the church, with the gospel. We can bring the gospel into that space. So what they are doing that's so different is they're keeping it small. They're diving deep into these house groups. They're diving deep into relationship. They're developing young professionals. And they're having huge connection, huge success, specifically with Generation Z. So one thing that they do that is kind of unique is they host these catalytic events, which is basically, they do a conference twice a year where they gather as many people as they can. And those conferences have generally been centered around what does it look like to live life on mission. And then they also lean into meeting felt needs of the next generation. So they talk about loneliness. They talk about how to move up in the company. They talk about all kinds of things, meeting felt needs and felt desires of the next generation. And they also host these gathering events. These are large, fun gatherings, like happy hour events, where they gather people. And the whole hope is that at those events, they would connect in relationship and in community. And then from there, once they're engaged, they plug them into small groups, house churches around the city. And it's growing like crazy. Here's one other thing. They have this YouTube channel, and they've been developing YouTubes, but these YouTube channels are just ways to engage people on the outside. So they're talking about how to stop anxiety, how to make friends in a new city. They're meeting felt needs of the people that they're talking to. So they are finding ways to take the generation to the next stage, that church. So what does all of that point us to as we dream about engaging the next generation? And this is by no means like a recipe or like a perfect scenario. Like this is what you need to do. These are things that if you want to engage the next generation, these are places to start. And as we've been talking about, like dreaming about being missional with the next generation, being innovative with the next generation, let's start dreaming around these areas. Because they're always online, we must leverage social media. Let's take the gospel to social media. They're looking for community. They're looking to be known. The next generation is hungry for relationship. So how do you get to a spot where you can engage them in real relationship? How do you get them to a place where you can begin having real conversations? Honestly, in my experience, the best place to do that is at a coffee shop. Or even better, in my living room, at my couch, at my dining room table. Invite them into your home, invite them into real relationship. They're looking for discipleship and mentorship. What does it look like to come alongside somebody from the next generation and say, I see this in you. I see this gifting. I see this potential. I think that you're going to be the next missionary or the next church planter or the next business owner, or you're going to be a teacher and you're going to change the public schools. In all of my years in student ministry, one of my favorite moments is having that I see in you conversation. Because that is something they're so hungry for, but they're not getting it anywhere. Everything that they're hearing is the next generation is so bad. You're always on your phone. You're not engaged in the church. You need to be at Sunday service. But they're not getting that big vision, like the one that Jesus gave to his disciples, like, let's go change the world. Let's make disciples of every nation and go change the world and bring hope to dark places. So what does it look like to take everything that they have, everything that God has given them, and say, this is how that looks in the kingdom? You're a teacher. What does it look like to be a teacher for Jesus in the public school system? That's when you come in with the relationship and you begin crafting that and developing that vision and giving them something to chase after. You have a heart for the business world. What does it look like to walk with them into your business and show them how to do it? How to leverage your business for the kingdom? Maybe you're a pastor. What does it look like to loosen your grip on this microphone on Sunday morning and say, no, I believe in you and I'll give you the stage and the platform to start preaching? That's what they're hungry for. They're hungry for discipleship and mentorship and opportunities to lead. And they're so hungry for someone to say, I believe in you. Now let's walk in that direction together. Yeah, you might be hooked on your phone. What does it look like to replace your phone with the Bible? This is how I read the Bible. What does it look like to take everything that God has given you and say, let's go change the world with it? It doesn't need to look like it has always looked. I would challenge every single one of you to begin praying over somebody in the next generation and saying, God, what is it that you have on this young person? What are the giftings that you've given this person? And how do you want to use it in the kingdom? And just telling them, hey, I think that you would be a great preacher someday. And see how they respond. Some of them might be like, what? I've never even thought about that. They're looking for a big vision. As a leader, let's cast that vision for them. It's a vision that we didn't create. It's a vision that we're all invited into. Let's make the world better. Let's leverage the next generation to make the world better. Let's give them something that they can fight for. They're looking to follow leaders that are authentic. They're looking to follow leaders that are transparent, that are willing to wrestle and be vulnerable with them. You don't have to have it all together. You don't need to be the guy with the cool shoes and the cool tattoos in order to walk with somebody of the next generation. You just have to be willing to open up and crack it open and let them know that following Jesus is often messy. And it's not smooth. And there's times when you question God's goodness. And there's times when you're up all night wrestling with the realities of the gospel. And they're looking for opportunities to lead. The next generation is looking for opportunities to lead. So let's give it to them. Let's stop keeping the church from them. Let's hand the church over to them. Let's give them vision to change the world. Again, it's not from us. It's from God. It's God's plan to change the world and make it a better place. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for today. Thank you for this conference, Lord. I pray that you would spark something in this room today. I pray that you would spark new visions among the young people, that they would chase after, that they would trust you with big things, God, that they would fall in love with your word. Lord, I pray for the leaders in this room. I pray that you would give them supernatural ability to connect with the next generation, to empower the next generation, and come alongside them, walking towards the future. In Jesus' name, amen. Do you guys have any questions you want to process? Do we have another microphone? Hang on. Thank you.
So I was just curious about cross-cultural, like children from other countries. Does this kind of apply in the same way?
I'm 100% sure a lot of the things apply. I'm also 100% sure there's huge differences. These are specifically in the United States, but the reality is, as the world changes, there's a lot of blending going on around the world, where teens are beginning to look a lot more similar than they are different in culture and in thought and in a lot of things. But yeah, this study was specifically with U.S. young people.
I was thinking it probably would because of the internet, because
Yeah.
they're all seeing the same things. And
Yeah, with globalization, a lot of things are kind of blurring in a lot of ways.
I recently heard from, so there was a research on Gen Z from McKinsey, and they found that the Gen Zs are the most healthiest generation. What is your takeaway from that one?
I believe it. I mean, I think it probably depends a lot on how you define healthy, because while they are hooked on their screens, which is not healthy, and their loneliness percentages are going up, mental health issues are going up. So it depends on how you define it. But I would say they're more active than previous generations. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it was saying that they're concerned more on the fitness, and they
Yeah.
avoid sugar, and they're very picky and choosing menus. So yeah, that's what I heard.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Are there one last question, and then we'll call it?
So how do we go about with the mentorship? Is that something we wait for them to initiate?
I think that's a very good question. I think the probably fastest way to do that is to plug into a ministry within your church. And you have to get to a spot where you can begin to develop trust. So finding a way to start to build the relationship and build the trust, and then you can go deeper. So I think one of the best places to do that is your youth group, or another place where you can begin to rub shoulders consistently and show up consistently with specific students. All right, thank you.